Welcome to the Unconsumed podcast. I'm here with founder of Rev.com, Jason Chicola. Jason, thanks for being on the show. How are you?
Hey, Lee, doing great. Thanks a lot.
So, Jason, I'm looking at your history here, and you have a lot of things that people are, they spend their whole life pursuing. For instance, the MIT education. You've worked at McKinsey, one of the most difficult consulting practices to get into. And then you essentially went away from that, and then now you're an angel investor. You founded multiple companies. I mentioned the angel investing. You're invested in 15 different operations. Can you tell us a little bit upfront about what you're doing at Rev today, and then we'll kind of back it off and talk to the rest of the story?
Sure. So Rev is a platform for remote work. Our mission is to create millions of work-from-home jobs. Today, there are 20,000 people that work from home every month on the Rev platform.
Right.
And it's a bit like Uber in the sense that they can work whenever they want on whatever they want. The kinds of work they do today are mostly around typing. So we do a lot of audio transcription and closed captioning. And so to make it kind of real, if you watch a show on Netflix and you turn on the captions, there's a good chance that we might have done it. When we look at the world, we see, you're working from a home office. I work from home office sometimes. Right. I believe that today, probably 3 to 5% of Americans work from home, and I believe that by the time I die, it'll probably be 50%.
Right.
So our belief, kind of the reason for being for the company, is this notion that the internet makes it possible to work from home. We want to identify the industries where the job can move from the office to the home and create kind of great jobs that are powered by technology, where businesses pay for a service and freelancers do the work. And so that's pretty much what we're doing. I think we're on a good path to getting there.
Awesome. That's so cool. And you mentioned the Netflix thing, and I guess I'll dig more into this in the future, but does Netflix not do that themselves, or are you working with the content essentially creator to get that transcription done?
We largely work with the content creator.
Gotcha.
In fact, a lot of YouTube channel owners will use us. So, who pays for captions kind of depends, but by and large, it's the person making the content or distributing the content.
Interesting. So as a podcaster, should I be using Rev.com to transcribe my podcast?
So selfishly, yes. But if I take off, my kind of Rev hat. So what are the reasons why you might want a transcript? You might want to get organic traffic. You might want to publish it as a blog post to get SEO. There's tons of content that's not getting indexed. Right. So you might get more discovery, which is a good thing. It would give you a written record of the podcast, which some people will use either for editing or to get notes for future shows or to refer back to what was said for future discussions. Some people prefer to read than to listen. So you can kind of repurpose your content in a new way. You can be present in more channels. So those are all the reasons why podcasters like transcripts. And if you thought of the top 10 podcasts by traffic, you'd find that several of them use us, like This American Life and some of the Gimlet guys. They'll use Rev. We have a lower cost service, which I think you know about, called Timmy.com.
Right.
Which is automated, not human. And it's relevant because it's cheaper. So instead of costing $1 a minute, it's $0.10 a minute. And that's quickly becoming the tool of choice for independent podcasters that don't have a big budget, but still want a transcript.
Okay, so I should be using Timmy is what you're saying, because this is a bootstrap operation.
Yes, sir. You got that.
Love it. Okay, awesome. So let's start at the beginning. Like, where are you from? Tell us about Jason Chicola growing up.
Yeah, so grew up in South Florida, in Miami, and was always really into math. I think if you asked me, people asked me, like, when I was in high school, what I want to do when I grew up, and I really had no idea. I was just very curious. I was always curious about a lot of things, and loved math and science, but didn't want to get siloed or stuck in any one discipline. I love learning new things, and connecting the dots from years later. I really think entrepreneurship is it's the right place for me, or it's right for people that are very curious,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm always having to learn new things. The skills that got us to success yesterday are not the skills that we need to go from today to where we want to be in the next phase. So
Right.
we're constantly learning new things. And I think that kind of curiosity has helped me a lot. Growing up, I was always, head in a book, head in studies, did some sports, a little wrestling. But by and large, I think I had a nerdy, not particularly unusual childhood.
Gotcha. So, well, you mentioned the books. Did you have a favorite author or anything that like struck you at that age that, maybe you've carried with you?
Um, in high school, I think I read mostly fiction. As an adult, I read mostly nonfiction.
Right.
Probably kind of end of high school, I really got into Dostoyevsky and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And if I was to highlight one book that I think had a big impact on me that I would certainly recommend to anybody, it's this big, long book by Dostoyevsky called The Brothers Karamazov.
Mm-hmm.
And what I liked about the book was it tells the story of four brothers, and each of them represents a certain extreme personality type. One was the passionate one was the intellectual, one was the spiritual one, and one was like the bastard was the bad one, or the one that had the most kind of immoral issues. And the cool thing is, I feel like when I read it, initially I thought, I'm going to see in myself, I'm gonna identify more with the one that's more intellectual and bookish. Right. And as I got into it, I realized that I saw many aspects of myself in each one of the characters, and I kind of felt I felt I learned a lot about myself, and the fact that everybody has different personalities within them, and sometimes you bring out one or the other to the forefront. So it's a book I highly recommend.
Yeah, I love that book too. I had some guys over this morning and we were talking about it, and I kind of subconsciously have the quote in my head all the time of "above all, know thyself." That's a Brothers Karamazov line, and it's permeated my thought process all the time, because if I can sit down and understand my own why is the pop culture term of it right now, or I can understand why I'm doing something or why I want something, it helps big time in being able to control potential outcomes. And I think that book talks to that a lot. And that book is more recommended by smart people than many other books. I was going to say any other book, but obviously that's not true. But it's highly recommended. So yeah, it's great to hear you recommend that one too.
Small world.
Yeah, right. Well, it keeps getting smaller as you get older. So you're in Austin, Texas now. How did you get from Florida up to Boston, out to Austin?
A couple steps. In my 20s, I moved around a lot. I had a new job every 2 or 3 years, and I've lived in Miami, in Boston, and San Francisco.
Okay.
So what brought me to Austin was 3 years ago, I was living in San Francisco, and the company was doing well, and we were growing. We were having challenges hiring engineers, which everybody in the Bay Area has these challenges. And I realized that I wanted to put an office in a market that had a good standard of living and kind of a better work-life balance, where I felt we'd be able to recruit people effectively, but also have a place where engineers could go and buy a house and live sustainably.
Right.
The Bay Area, is the epicenter of tech, but they're coming out on some real issues. I've been seeing studies now that are saying that like most of the millennials in the Bay Area want to leave because they can't afford a house, and there's no easy fix. So Austin has a lot of the things that the Bay Area has. It has an incredible talent pool, and it's expensive for Texas, but if you compare it to other places with a large tech scene, it's pretty affordable. So it's just been a fantastic place, and we now I commute between here and SF. We have offices in both places, and each has certain advantages, and I like to think that we're able to get the best of both by having a presence in each market.
Yeah, as a risk manager by, I don't know, DNA, I look at that situation because I moved from Chicago to Texas for the same exact reason. Like I can get, at that time, this would have been 5 years ago, I can get essentially twice for the price of $1, right? In terms of land and house and all that stuff. And oh, by the way, it doesn't freeze here, which is a big deal for the overall stability of houses and roads. Like I don't think I see as, if there's one pothole in Austin, Texas, there's 10 for it in Chicago. So that's a big deal.
Totally.
So yeah, so tell me about we're kind of riffing around here, but the process of you realizing in high school that you are of a certain percentage of people that can get into an MIT. Can you like tell us what that was like and how it was like getting in there and deciding what you want to do once you finally break into that? You know, it's not technically Ivy League, but that Ivy League type.
Right. Well, thanks for the kind words. And you know, I probably if I was 13, when I was 13 or 14, I had no idea. But by the time I was 15 or 16, I was really doing well in math and science classes, and I enjoyed it. And I had an uncle that probably knew more about the world than I did, and he says, "Well, if you're really good at math, you should look at MIT." And I looked it up, or probably this before I had internet access, so I don't know how I looked it up, but I heard about it. I just heard it was a good school for math and science. It's where you want to go. Right. And the more people asked, the more people said, "Well, it's probably hard to get into. It's probably hard to be there, but if you can get in there, great." And I kind of didn't know much, but I knew enough that, well, I want to be the best that I can be, so I set my sights on it. And, you know, worked hard in school and did all the things people tell you to do, not just grades, but activities and leadership and volunteering, all that kind of stuff. Right. And applied and got in. And when I can remember very specifically I want to say fall of my senior year, going up to visit, and it was a pretty eye-opening experience. You know, the campus is not that pretty. It's an urban campus, and so it's kind of melds in with the rest of the city, right? Yeah, it's not one of these like beautiful, like picturesque, small town Ivy sort of campuses. But I met a bunch of people there, and it just sort of clicked. It felt like the place for me. In fact, there was a program at MIT where if you wanted to like visit, you could stay overnight at a fraternity. The fraternity, it sounds kind of crazy, but you know, as a high school kid, they say, hey, these fraternities, they always want to meet freshmen to potentially rush some of them. So they'll offer like place to stay and somebody to show you around. And so I did that and walked into a fraternity and was like, this is awesome. Okay, I want to come back and do this. And I think, you know, if there's a knock on MIT, it's that the school is obviously a little over-indexed on math and science relative to the humanities and being well-rounded. It doesn't. Right. School does not produce well-rounded graduates in the way that you would expect from, say, like a Stanford, which has an engineering program that's probably 95% as good, but it's got all the other stuff as well. So I did have a little bit of concerns. Do I want to go? Because, look, I mean, if you think of all the stereotypes that you would think of about a school like that in terms of social awkwardness, it's all true. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not awkward, but I mean, like, you can imagine, if you imagine what MIT is like, that's what it's like, right? Yeah. So I look at MIT and I think, okay, so this place is specifically made to create minds that are as developed as you can be at math and science, right? Correct. Or Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So math, science, technology, call it whatever you like. Right. And I think there's such a place for that because when everything is well-rounded, you don't have the off-the-charts totally plotted. And so I look at that and I'm like, I'm not that, but I think it's pretty darn cool. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, for me, it's a desire I want to learn from the best and I want to push myself and I want to, you know, everybody says that, like, and it's true that when you go from the minor leagues to the major leagues, you might have been the best in the minor leagues, and you won't be the best in the major leagues. And sure enough, that's exactly the case. I mean, that, you know, in high school, like, it's just like in a sport. You know, you know who's good and you know where you stand. And then you get to, you know, a more selective crowd. And there are people that are so far ahead of where I am that hey, it's cool. It's like it's not an ego thing anymore. It's like, hey, I'm pretty good. I can learn a lot. They push me, but you kind of realize there's always somebody that's way better than you, and that's healthy. I mean, I think part of growing up is realizing that you can win a lot, but you don't always win.
Yeah, it's I've been thinking about this a lot because there's a hierarchy in every subcategory, right? So there's a hierarchy of who's good at math in the world, right?
Sure.
And it's not something that's talked about often enough, or maybe it is talked about enough, but it exists. And so if you can understand where you are at that and slowly steady plod from wherever you are, you can increase, but you'll probably never get to the top.
Yeah, but that helps you to figure out your path.
Exactly.
Just to give you an example, if you're in high school and you're doing well in math, there's a test. At least there used to be a test.
Right.
It was called like the ASHME. It was like the American High School Math Exam, something like that.
Okay.
And I took it, and a lot of kids took it, and if you do well on it, you get invited to take like the next test, right,
Mm-hmm.
which is a more elite thing. And I did that, and I got to the second test. Well, I get to college, and I had a friend that aced the first test, aced the second test, in the second test I like bombed, and went like aced the third test, and then he gets a call from the NSA, right, the spooks, right, the spooks at the NSA contact the people that aced the third test, and they say, would you like to serve your country? We would love to pay for your education if you would come and basically crack codes for us after you graduate. It's a feeder for that. So that's not a bucket I was in, okay? But there is that bucket.
Yes.
And and it's like I know how far I could go, and there are people that go way beyond that. And I imagine probably I don't know much about the NSA because it's super secretive, right?
Spooks. I love that.
But that's what they are, right? These are the guys that are cracking codes and all that stuff, and they have a lot of the nation's top math talent somewhere in the DC area.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an example of something where you see somebody that goes way beyond. And I know that some of these guys, and they would take classes in college like with names like Advanced Complexity Theory, where you'd see the work and it's all Greek letters.
Right. That's funny. The NSA, not to be confused with my friends at the TSA.
Correct. No, very different.
Very different set of crew. But yeah, so and I mentioned the hierarchy because if you can be somewhere in the math hierarchy, there are hierarchies for everything. So if you're a math and science hierarchy and you place somewhere in the top 50%, like you are dangerous at both things. But then, oh, by the way, if you can, in a social hierarchy, be somewhere at a reasonable level as well, like you have a whole different slant of talent that you can go address the marketplace with.
Well, yeah, and let me address that a little bit because
the
way you frame it is a lot the way I think about. In the business world, if you want to be successful at a field, start a company, as an investor, make a lot of money, it generally isn't about being the 1 in a million on one dimension. It's about being 1 in 10 on a couple dimensions.
Yes.
And I think that's critical. So I'm not the best salesperson in the world, but I can sell. I'm not the best math person in the world, but I can do math, right?
Right.
And, that's kind of an advantage, right? And so I would encourage your listeners to just think about, hey, you don't need to be, well, if you want to be Michael Jordan or LeBron, you got to be Michael Jordan or LeBron, okay? But in the business world, it's find two things that you're good at that are different domains. There's not that many people are good at both, and combine those, and that's where the magic tends to happen.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. And that's what I talk about all the time, because like your method of I'm good at math, I'm good at sales, but I'm better at math, and I've coupled those two things. I'm good at sales, and I can kind of do math. And that has been what's opened doors for me over time. So It doesn't have to be the same essentially formula for everybody. In fact, the more variation in the formula, the better the outcome is for the whole world, I think.
Well, yeah. So you've worked as an investor, so have I. If you imagine, who goes to Wall Street makes a lot of money? It's not the best guy at math. Right?
True.
Now, there are some of those probably in the quant division, right? But you get, a Harvard lacrosse player, right? And that guy goes and does sales at Goldman Sachs and makes millions a year, right? Because, he's good at math, but he's incredible with people as well, right?
Yes.
And that tends to be the combination. And he has a lot of drive, right? Because he's been a winner and he wants to keep winning, right? So people skills, drive, being competent in analytics, that tends to be the combination that leads to a lot of success in the marketplace.
So what do you tell to someone who is like, hasn't found that thing that they can couple with something else when they're still finding it? Like, think of yourself prior to when you were able to couple your math ability with your sales ability. What do you suggest to people trying to find it?
I mean, it probably depends on where somebody is career-wise, age-wise. Do you have wife and kids to support?
Mm-hmm.
But I encourage people to think about have at least 3 jobs in your 20s. And there's probably rare cases where you work at a company that's so enlightened that you can have 2 different jobs over, say, a 5-year period. But by and large, I encourage people to kind of zigzag in their career, because there's like the old way to think about jobs was get a job, work at a company, move up through the ladder, and in 30 years you get a watch or a mug and a pension, and it's all good, right? And
right.
my grandfather did that. My grandfather was an executive a mid-level executive at an insurance company, and I can remember as a kid being in his office, and he had like every memento and gift you could imagine with the logo of that company on it.
Right.
And they took care of him. My grandmother, is still living on the pension that he left for her, right?
Right.
So it was a great model, right? And nothing to knock it, but that model is out the window.
Yeah, it doesn't exist for us, that's for sure.
Right. And I have, a lot of beefs and gripes with the way the nation advises our young people to pursue career. And I'll just sort of, if you don't mind, dive into it, because
we got time. Yeah, game on.
When I was a kid, we were told a lie, which is study whatever you want and everything is going to work out. And I bet a lot of those people right now, or in the last 5 years, they were in the park in New York doing Occupy Wall Street, really, really upset, right?
Yeah, they're fired up about it, yeah.
And I bet if you did a survey, you'd find that, they majored in all these liberal arts fields, couldn't get a job, ended up super bitter, and ended up mad at capitalism, mad at the system.
And up to their knees in debt, too, yeah.
Exactly. So they're looking at life and saying this is broken. So in general, I encourage people to study something that's useful. Which tends to be certainly feels like engineering are helpful, but even accounting, law, medicine, something that either I encourage trade-oriented fields. If you want to do literature, I like literature. Read books, right? But I think when you go to school, invest in yourself. But in the job market, when people when they're seniors in college and they want to go get a job, they have no idea what jobs are available. The kinds of courses and majors that colleges offer have very little mapping to what jobs are out there, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to go into sales, I meet people that are young or even in college, and they have no idea what it means to be in sales. Right. If you're selling software, right, that can be a very stimulating, incredible career. And nobody in college has any idea what that field is like.
And it becomes very small at some level. So anything you can do is difficult to get into. And one other thing, and I'll let you keep going here, but do you feel like college, and I have major beefs with college if you've seen any of these podcasts, but I feel like college lags behind the current job market. So they're not creating curriculum for something that is cutting edge unless you go to just a few schools. So the vast majority of the college educated population is getting prepared for a job that is either not lending itself to the current marketplace or has potential to be automated, is really the major elephant in the room. I just wanted to make that point before.
Oh, no, absolutely. No, I think you're largely right. And I'll come to that in a second, but just the basic career advice I would say is that choose someone in their 20s. Pick a job that you think is going to open a lot of doors and give you a lot of options. That'll build skills that you think might be relevant in a variety of different fields you might take afterwards.
Right.
Do a job for 2 or 3 years, get some wins, and then go do something really different. Mm-hmm. And then do that twice. And chances are one of those 3 jobs will be close to something you really want to do. And so I think that, now this is not the path to making the most money. The path to making the most money is, if you're one of the privileged few that's able to get a really good education, whether it's in an Ivy League school or whether it's in law school. You can go work at a law firm, and if you stay at a law firm for 10 years, you can make a lot of money. Now, you might hate being a lawyer. You might end up married with kids with a high income and hating your life because you hate being a lawyer. So whether you want the path is sort of debatable. Same for being a doctor. You might not like it. But I encourage people to hop around. It's not the path to having the most money by age 30, but I think it is the path to helping you maximize the odds you find what's right for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just to interject real quick again, is that what when we're talking about find two things that you can be the 1 in 10 at and couple them together? When you're describing moving from 3 jobs in your 20s, like you can enter with the thing you know best so far. And I think you mentioned accounting. If you can get good at accounting, that can lend itself to so many other things.
Totally.
And then you go and you find at these 2 other jobs, you find something that you're kind of natural at. And then you take those 2 things, and if you're really lucky, you can couple them together or get rid of one, find something else, and then use that for the next role. Am I hearing that right?
Absolutely. I mean, in my career, I've hopped between different jobs that were all, around business, but within consulting, investing, entrepreneurship,
right.
Each of them gave me a toolkit and a perspective that I used in the other jobs, and I've done enough of them now that I can pull them together, and I think I have a much broader perspective than if I had only done one of those fields. When I meet people that have spent 8 years in consulting, I tend to think that if you spend 10 years in a field, you kind of become stuck, and it's almost like there's nothing else you can do. So, we hire a lot of people that have done consulting for 2 years. We haven't hired anybody that's done consulting for 10 years because we'd rather get somebody early on that's still a piece of clay that can be kind of shaped, is a bit of how we think about it. Back to your point on college, there's a ton wrong with college. It costs way too much. Half the majors are bullshit. It's not keeping up. It doesn't educate you well with what's out there in the job market.
Right.
But it's a great coming of age experience. It's really good to not live with your parents and to learn how to be an adult. It's good to colleges typically have a broader set of people, so hopefully you can find different pockets of people with different styles and personalities and interests that help you grow as a person. I know best my own experience, and in my case, part of my story, this is going to sound crazy, is I started Rev with 5 of my fraternity brothers.
Oh, wow.
And
did this grow up in the fraternity house, or were these relationships you brought from the past?
So I'm almost 40. So these are relationships from my fraternity, and we were in college during the dot-com boom. We saw the dot-com boom rising and falling around us. In fact, we had, I remember guys that were a little older than us in the fraternity that graduated 2 or 3 years before we did. And, guys who in college were kind of a dope, and a year out of school, someone's like, hey, that guy's worth millions on paper. And everyone's like, what the F is going on? This is insane.
Right.
And some of them cashed out and became millions in the bank, and some of them held on to stock and it went to zero. But that was a common story. We understood that the internet was going to be a big deal, but the experience of we graduated college in June of 2000. The NASDAQ crashed in March of 2000.
Right.
So by June 2000, it seemed like the party was over, and I can remember the last party at the fraternity of my pledge class, the people that joined my year. We were having a party on our roof, and like the next day, people were going to fly away to their summer job or med school, wherever the hell they were going. And we talked about one day we should all get back together to start a company. And, maybe in 10 years, we need to go get some experience, save a little money, pay off our student debt, and so forth.
Yeah.
And 10 years later, I started calling everybody, hey, I got this idea, let's work on it. And it's kind of come together. Yeah. So as much as I can knock college, I think the relationships that you can build are invaluable. My situation there is pretty unusual in that that's worked out in a big way. But even beyond that, just I learned so much from both my peers my age and also guys older than me, upperclassmen in my fraternity. I saw them go through the job market. I saw them interviewing. They explained to me what it meant to work at company X, Y, and Z. They told me about their experiences, internships. I learned so much from my peers, and was fortunate in going to a good school that a lot of these guys that were a year or two ahead of me, they were going out and getting good jobs. And they were coming back and telling me, this one sucked, that one's awesome, here's why, here's how the job works, here's what you need to do. I got so much from that. And I think that if you can go to college and you can put yourself in a place where you're surrounded by driven people that are going places, your learning accelerates. And so for me, college is, probably first and foremost, the top two things are the people around you you'll learn a lot from. And the other thing is what economists call the signaling value. There's a huge amount of debate as to whether you learn anything in college.
Okay.
But you ask me all these questions because you heard at MIT, right? So
yes.
It has signaling value. If I had never gone to one class, you wouldn't know, right?
I would not know. Yeah.
Exactly. So the signaling value is very real, right? There's no question of that. But the relationship value, I think is, for me, has been even more real.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's I went to a small school in Virginia, and the people I hung around were not MIT level folks, right? So it builds off of itself. So like you can call your 5 friends from college that just so happen to be in the right place at the right time with you, and then those people are high enough on a hierarchy of math or science or technology.
Sure.
And then those groups get together. Whereas in my college experience, I went through, I looked for those people and found maybe 3 on campus that I thought would be viable for this type of thing. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So when you're in that, it's much a different experience, but it's still valuable to talk to it. After the college experience, and we'll hit the rest of your career prior to Timmy and Rev, it goes McKinsey, and then you went to a VC called GlobeSpan. Can you tell us about what it was like going from McKinsey into VC? Like, what do they want from people?
Sure. So, like I was saying, coming out of college, I didn't know where I wanted to end up,
right.
But I knew what McKinsey was. It's consulting large companies, giving them advice on CEO level issues, and that just sounded really interesting to me. And it was. And they had their philosophy has been and is that they hire basically people with good academic records who have no business experience, and they teach them the ropes. And so they invest in people. And I went, and it was great. It was what I expected. I learned a ton. And I served, let's say, 8 clients over 2 years, telecom companies on strategy, startups on whether they could get funding or not. I'd served some tech companies on how to restructure their sales force. I learned a lot about business in a short amount of time. And they also give a lot of training and coaching on how to do analysis, how to present clearly, skills that I think are building blocks in a good career. Mm-hmm. So it was a really good foundation for me. And then at the time, I literally thought, this is so great, so interesting, because I have a new project every 3 months that I'll maybe try to be a partner to do this forever. Right. And they encourage people to go off and go to business school and come back. They want people to grow up a little bit. And I had so much student debt and that I just didn't think I wanted to go back to school at that point and get into more debt. I wanted to keep working. And I had seen the tech industry, had worked at some startups during college, so I thought venture capital seems really cool. At the time, I had a girlfriend in Boston, so I didn't look at firms on the West Coast. I focused on firms in Boston, and I found a great firm that gave me a super experience. And it was a totally different job. The venture capital firms obviously invest in early stage startups, make equity investments, hoping for a return, and my job was to work with the partners of that firm to help them make the right choices. And so I was helping them evaluate startups, which meant trying to get a read on whether or not this was a market that was going to be large, whether or not this technology was going to be better than the other company in the market. There's certainly some work around the math of investing, understanding the economics of preferred stock investments and how those play out. learning about technology trends in new markets. So it was, I think, a great experience. And the last thing I should say is, as an investor, any kind of investor, you see a lot of companies, and
Right.
so every company you see, it's like taking a new class in school. Okay, yesterday I was looking at, so I made investments in companies in the wireless software space, and then investments in the storage software space, and then data center management software, and yeah, they're all related, they're all tech, but they're all different categories. So
Right.
you constantly had to educate yourself, and that learning process was great. And I do think that became a lot of that perspective I gained has certainly been helpful both as an entrepreneur and an investor. But to kind of connect the dots, so when I started at this VC firm, I thought I'm just trying to like broaden my horizons before going to business school and to go back into consulting. After like 2 weeks, I'm like, screw this. Being an investor is better than consulting. I want to do this. I want to be a VC. And then after like a year, I met a couple entrepreneurs that had made such an impression on me. They had presence and charisma and confidence, and they were able to kind of chart their own path.
Right.
And in venture, you quickly realize that the entrepreneur is the hero. I mean, in a way, or that they're the ones that have the true roller coaster of emotion, because to use like a nerdy term, investors get to take their bets in parallel, that is many at once, whereas entrepreneurs take them in serial. Right? Entrepreneur has all his eggs in one basket,
Yeah.
and so it's an emotional roller coaster. So after meeting a couple of great entrepreneurs, I thought that's what I want to do. And toward the end of my 2-year experience there, I went to the partners and I said, look, I'd like to learn about entrepreneurship. I want to, be an operator. This was in 2004, at a time when 25-year-olds didn't start companies. Too expensive. There was no Amazon Web Services.
Mm-hmm.
I was still paying off my student loans, almost done probably by that time. And so I wanted to be like the right-hand guy to an entrepreneur. And I asked the partners, introduce me to founders that are doing cool things that could use some help. And they made a bunch of intros. And the one that really made an impression on me was I met a guy in Northern California who had started a company that was then called Odesk, and is now called Upwork.
So this is one of my favorite things here, because I found Odesk when I was scrapping along as a young man trying to start my first thing, and I've used it in everything since, and it's since become Upwork. So when I saw that on your resume, I was like, that was cool. Were you there right from the start?
Almost, just about. So the founders started it in the very beginning of 2003. Mm-hmm. They raised a seed round, and so I'll tell you that and basically I joined 18 months later, but I joined at a time when they had no money to pay me, so I spent 3 months helping them like as a volunteer for no pay, with the idea being that if I could prove to the founder that I was valuable and he wanted to work with me, that he would be able to pay me once they got funding, and that the work that I would do would kind of be sweat equity, that I would be earning my way into a bigger equity stake than if I had demanded cash from day one.
Gotcha.
So it was a phenomenal life experience. If I look at one experience in my professional life that's really that I wouldn't trade for anything, it was this experience. So all told, I spent 3 years there, and helped raise the Series A and B rounds. So you know all about Odesk/Upwork because you've been a customer. Let me just for your listeners put into context. Could you just like describe like what you use it for, and what like have you had only good experiences, or have you had any bad experiences with Upwork?
So the thing I love about Upwork is that you can go out to Upwork and find someone who can do any technical task or menial task or manual task, right? So what I use Odesk for is I've used it for coders before. I've used it for list creation before. I've used it for list building is really the biggest one. I use it to the tune of probably 10 to 14,000 records at a time in an Excel sheet as the deliverable. The thing that's great about it is you can get access to all these people that are ready to do this thing, and they follow directions very well, and they deliver quick work. The only negative is that once they have your contact information, they call you forever. So there's this guy in Malaysia who I had do a very small piece of work one time. It came back just fine. And he calls me from a randomized phone number every week from then.
Jesus.
Yeah, so he's just working through a list, which is fine, and I block all the numbers, and occasionally I pick up, and he's like, "Hello, this is his last name is Fox. This is blank Fox. Do you have any work for me?" And I'm like, "Well, the answer is yes, I do have work for you, but because of this tactic, I'll use anybody else." And so, if you're on Upwork or you're a Odesk worker, don't do that. Be good at your job, and I'll hire you on your rankings. So that's my experience. It's been the best.
That's perfect. Upwork is an entrepreneur's best friend. Every entrepreneur loves it because it makes things that would be nearly impossible pretty easy. That said, it's the Wild West. I mean, it really is the Wild West. And what I mean by Wild West, you don't always know what you're going to get. Okay. Now, the company has worked very hard over the years to make it more reliable and predictable. And by and large, they've done a pretty good job.
Right.
But it's been a long road to get there. So I'll give you a couple of the highlights. I'll start off with some things at the beginning that are really not well known. Mm-hmm. So here's the backstory of the company, how it got created. This is kind of the origin myth, although it's not a myth. The founders are two Greek guys. And this is public information, named Odysseus Tatalos and Stratis Karmelakis. And Odysseus was working in the Bay Area for a different software company, and he went to the head of engineering. He was the CTO. He went to the head of engineering and managed the engineering team and said, "Hey, we should hire this friend of mine in Greece who's a phenomenal engineer, and he'd be great for the company." Mm-hmm. And the head of engineering said, "I'm sure he's great, but there's no way I'm going to hire somebody in Greece. We're in San Jose. That doesn't make any sense." Mm-hmm. And imagine the conversation that ensued. The founder's like, "But we have the internet. He checks in his code digitally. Just tell him, we'll send him the code he needs to write. He'll write it, and that's it.
And he'll do it for cheaper because his overhead's lower."
All the above. And if we have to talk to him, we can either call him on the phone, or this might have been before Skype. Maybe there was Skype. We can make it work. Mm-hmm. Is what the CTO was saying. The head of engineering is saying, "There's no way I'm hiring somebody far away." And after months of debate and arguing and trying to figure out why was it that the engineering manager, who was a very experienced manager, didn't want to hire somebody far away. He only wanted to hire people in the office. It took the CTO who founded Odesk quite some time to figure out why managers wouldn't hire somebody far away. But the answer that he came up with, I think, is sort of brilliant, which he realized that there's a lack of trust. Mm-hmm. When somebody is near me in the office, there's many benefits of them being in the office. Well, one of the benefits is I know that they're working for me.
Right.
Okay? That is a benefit. And there's a lot of dirty things and dishonesty that happen in global labor markets where there's not clear communication. A common practice that we learned about that's very common in the kinds of body shops that are in India and other places is American company says, "We want to hire 10 engineers." And they say, "Sure, here's 10 engineers. Here they are."
Right.
And then what happens? They sell those same 10 engineers to 3 other companies. Mm. So you're really getting them for 3 hours a day, 2 hours a day, not 8 hours a day. And you have no way to know that as the boss. It's just things are taking longer, but they're working on it every day. And then what happens is, because their labor market in India is very hot and very fluid, half of the people in those seats leave, go work for another company. So they bring 5 new people off the street, put them in those same seats, have them log into the same email accounts, and the quality of code gets worse. As the customer, you have no idea why.
Right.
That was a common practice. That is a common practice. Mm-hmm. And a manager that's aware of that is going to be a worry of using somebody far away. So, given all of these trust issues, the core innovation from the founder of then Odesk, now Upwork. I'll try to use Upwork for now on, although I prefer the name Odesk. Is he said we're going to make software to solve the trust problem that keeps an eye on the worker. And as a customer, you're aware of what this is. They have software that was called the Work Diary, that the worker runs software on his sys tray on a Windows computer, but basically software that's in the background. Once every 10 minutes, it takes a screenshot of what's on their monitor at a random time. They don't know when it's coming. And that screenshot is fed into a tape. Now, they control the tape. They can delete things if they want. But that tape is tied to the billing system. So if you work for 20 hours, you ought to have 20 hours of screenshots.
Yes.
And it's a simple idea. It's pretty aggressive. People called it Big Brother. I remember when I first started doing PR, somebody called it slavery. Someone said it was slavery online. Obviously, I think that's ridiculous.
That is ridiculous. So
that was the core idea. So the question is, how do you go from there to a company that now is quite large? From what I've heard, so a couple of years ago, the company announced that it was doing over $1 billion in annual customer spend. That was several years ago. So I believe the number now is likely over $2 billion because it's grown quite a bit since then.
Wow.
And, how did they get there? All they started with was this, I'll call it Big Brother monitoring software. So the first thing the founder did was he went to some CEO, multiple serial entrepreneur that he knew and said, let's build a company around this. So the guy said, sure, I know what to do. We're going to go to these outsourcing shops and say, you can use the software to create trust at your customers. So they went to India and wherever the shops were, and they went to the people that ran them and said, here's software that you can use to give your customers visibility into the work.
Yes.
Can you guess how that went?
I imagine very poorly because they don't want visibility into the work.
Yeah, it went poorly for a lot of reasons, right? I mean,
Okay.
Depends on the firm. Now, you could imagine two scenarios. You could have a totally dishonest firm that likes triple billing people, so they don't want the software.
Right.
You could imagine a very honest firm that's doing everything right.
Okay.
And you go to them and say, hey, we're gonna use the software, but then they go to their employees and say, hey, we're gonna put the software on your computer. And the people say, no way, I didn't sign up for this, right? You're hiring me, you don't trust me, that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. So everybody barfed on it. So this whole strategy, customers thought it was a great idea. The people doing the work or the agencies thought it was terrible. So It took them a year to figure out the strategy was kind of dead on arrival. And so they had raised a $500,000 seed round, and they burned through nearly all of it pursuing this market that turned out not to be a market.
Wow. But then it shifted into what Odesk is.
Right. So that's right. So there's this great term in Silicon Valley, the pivot. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there are some great examples of pivots. Like there was a podcasting company called Odeo that became Twitter. There's some great pivots. This was a pretty good pivot. It wasn't quite as big as that pivot, but
it's worked out well.
It's worked out. So the founder realized that, well, if two people are working together already, to go into that relationship and say, I'm going to insert the Big Brother software, that's too much. It's like going to your wife and say, I'm going to change the terms of our relationship, right? You can't do that after you've been married for a long time, right?
Right.
But, but when you meet somebody for the first time, that's when you can say, here's how I need this to be. If you want to work with, if you meet an engineer you want to hire, and you say, I'll hire you, but you have to use the software, no problem. Mm-hmm. No big deal. If they want the job, they'll take it. So he figured this out. The founder had a friend who was a Russian guy that knew a lot of Russian open source programmers who were really skilled. They were in places like literally Siberia. Okay. How do you think the job market is in Siberia? Right? Not very good.
Great. Yeah.
Not great. Right. So an engineer that was every bit as good as the guys making six figures in Silicon Valley was making $5 an hour.
Quick question. Why is that? So like, you hear a lot about Russian developers and how they're really technically skilled. How are those guys getting to that level in Siberia? Do you have any theories on that? Because if not,
I think it's really simple. A couple of ways. I mean, look, Russia had a space program and a nuclear program that rivaled ours.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the foundations, a lot of the foundations of a country's technical capacity actually comes from, military science endeavors, right?
Right.
If you look at a lot of the universities, I mean, MIT gets huge funding, if not half their funding, from government programs. And radar was developed at MIT in a building that's, was falling apart when I was on campus. Huge amounts, like all the military technology, not all, a lot of it, half of it, more than half, comes out of universities.
So you think that the technical prowess of Russian developers and just people in that frame of the world comes from essentially Cold War investment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
Interesting. I never heard that before, but I mean,
right.
Makes perfect sense.
Show me a strong military with good nukes, and I'll show you a good science program.
All right.
Okay.
Does that apply to anywhere else that you can think of? Like, it's the same here as it is over here?
I mean, very, very likely. There's no question that Israel has an incredible technical. I mean, Israel is unique in a bunch of ways, but Israel, the knock on innovation, if you look at venture capital led innovation around the world, one of the biggest knocks you can make on it is that historically a lot of that innovation was copycat. That, hey, somebody does Groupon, so 2 years later, someone's doing the Groupon of Europe, someone's doing the Groupon of Brazil, someone's doing the Groupon of China, and these entrepreneurs, they're flying back and forth in Silicon Valley. They're just taking notes and going over there and saying, how I can copy that before they get there. And Israel, now that's changing in a couple of ways. China actually has some pretty legit innovation today, a lot of it. But Israel is notable in that it's a pretty small market where Israel is not big enough to be a large market for anything. So anything they build has to be for other markets. And they've done a lot of innovation there. And a lot of Israel's innovation, but I guess back to the theory, has come out of the military. So I believe that Israelis or Israeli men are required to serve in the military, and I think a lot of the ones that are more technically oriented, their service is like writing software.
I think it's male and female are required.
There you go.
Yeah, that's really wild. So I think that might be one of the only places that's the case.
Yeah. So I mean, I know, for example, that the two areas where Israel is very strong are areas where there's huge military applications. One is in security, obviously, like detecting hacks and that kind of stuff. So Checkpoint is from Israel, a large software security company. They're also making computer vision. If you're Israel, you want to have cameras to spot bad stuff. So there's a lot of computer vision AI type companies that come out of Israel as well.
Yeah.
But on Russia, though, if you're a free markets guy, which I am, you kind of predict that if somebody can make $50 to $100 an hour in Silicon Valley, and they can make $5 an hour in Russia for the same skill, that as markets get more efficient, those prices ought to converge a little bit. And sure enough, they have. So the programmers were making $5 an hour when we met them. We went to them and said, "Hey, we're going to pay you $9 an hour tomorrow. The client's going to pay a little more than that, and it's all good." And as they started to develop a track record, a reputation, what that would mean is on Upwork, they have a profile, and each of the first project, they're making $9 an hour, they get 5 stars. Second project, $10 an hour, 5 stars. Third project, $12 an hour, 5 stars. Those same guys today, when I've looked back, some of them are still on the platform, they're making $30 an hour.
Yes.
$40 an hour, right? So for someone that's proven, the prices converge.
Yeah, and those prices are a steal to this day. Like you go on Odesk, you're getting top tier stuff. The only thing I would mention to someone using Odesk, maybe for development particularly, is if you're not a technical entrepreneur or you can't code yourself, you're going to want to bring someone in, a buddy, to have review this code as it comes through, because you might get an instance where something's coming through, something's being built, and there's an early issue that can mess things up. So if you're doing this, you're using Odesk for development, check that out. Make a friend. So
let's talk about that, because probably I have a story or two for you, but it's also a good segue into my next chapter, and that's about quality. If you want to find someone good to do a job for you across town, that's tough. Meet a lot of candidates, keep an eye on them, monitor their work. It's hard to hire somebody good across town. Now to hire somebody that's on a different continent, how much harder is that? all those same things you needed to do locally, you also need to do, but it's harder because you can't shake their hand. You can look them in the eye through video, maybe, but
You're not on the same time. The sun is in a different place for them.
that's right. Yeah, if they're in Malaysia, how many hours a day do you get to overlap? So if they go off in the wrong direction, they may go off in the wrong direction for 8 hours before you say, dude, you did the wrong thing. Right? Whereas if the guy who's sitting next to you, it'd be like 2 minutes, dude, wrong thing.
Yeah, you're pointing at a screen. You're like, that's wrong as he's doing it.
Exactly. So quality is an issue. It's
Right.
a challenge. Okay. And I started out with like the promise, and the best thing about the Upwork platform, the best thing about it for me is that it helps the guy in Russia, or the stay-at-home mom in Montana, or the designer in Indonesia. It helps them to live the kind of life they want to live, do the kind of work they want to do, and earn more than they can earn from whatever their other options are. I mean, it really is. Cheesy terms like empowering come to mind, but it gives these people an option that they really want, they wouldn't otherwise have. And so,
yeah, that's what struck me right away when I saw I watched several promotional videos from around the internet on rev.com, and you see people that are in different stages of life saying, I wanted to work from home, I wanted a certain quality of life, I signed up for rev.com, I sit here and I do my work and I get paid for it at the end of the week, which is killer for a lot of things. Like Uber doesn't pay every week, do they? Or do they pay on half months?
I actually think they do know. They've actually gotten, so all the marketplaces are competitive. They have to compete with Lyft. I actually think they've gone a step further. And if you drive for Uber, there are ways that you can actually get paid like almost right away.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's a competitive market. But so it's great for the person who wants the job.
Mm-hmm.
For the entrepreneur, it's also great because you're getting these awesome people at prices you can't find locally. Right. And you can get any talent, and you're near Austin, but you could be in Timbuktu. You could be, in Alaska, and you have the same access as if you were in Chicago.
Yes.
Right? Which is really cool. So, but what's the but? The but is that it's hard to know who's good. Yeah. And right now, the Upwork of today is what I would call a mature and vibrant marketplace. Mature and vibrant in that. There's a lot of liquidity. So these are terms we'll use in a marketplace that a lot of people are buying and selling all the time.
Right.
And when you go in there, I believe they've actually modified the platform so that if you go in there as a new buyer, they're only going to show you like Americans that are experienced. Because if you go in there as a new buyer your first time and you get a lot of applications from Indonesia, from people that haven't worked before, you're going to have a bad experience.
It'll scare you off. Yeah.
Totally. No, they're on there. And if you're experienced, you want access to that talent, right? But if it's your very first time working with someone remotely, the easiest thing to do, and this was, I think, something I heard secondhand that they figured out, that the way to start with training wheels is to work with Americans who speak English like you, are in a similar time zone. They're not quite as cheap as the people that are in Asia, but the communication barriers are so much lower that your odds of success are much higher. Mm-hmm. Now, you still might get someone that's not good. There's liquidity in that the people you're looking at have feedback scores. You can see who's worked with them. Now imagine going back to the beginning, the first 2 or 3 years. Right. There weren't no feedback scores. We had in fact, literally for the first year or two, we didn't even have a system to track the feedback. We had to build that, mm-hmm. right? And then once you start building it, the first day, there's like one guy had a star. Nobody has the stars, right? So we had all these.
So one guy has a star. I like that.
Yeah. So the feedback system wasn't there. So plenty of people got burned by someone that sucked, someone that couldn't do the work, someone that said, "I'll do the work, I'll make your site," and then you couldn't get it done. But they did it and it sucked. Happened all the time. And so that's like one big kind of issue. And something else I'll point out, and this is probably hard to imagine. I think this will be hard for you to imagine, but for the first full year that I was there, we had a sales team, and the way you found somebody was not self-service. It was you go to the website, and so we ran ads on Google saying hire Java programmers for $10 an hour. You come to the website and it would say, tell us what you need, and you say like, I need a Java programmer to make me a website that does X, Y, and Z, and I need them for like 20 hours a week. And that lead initially came to me.
Yeah.
I was the sales guy, and I would call the guy on the phone and say, I heard you need a Java programmer. We have a couple of great ones. Let me get you some resumes. Let me tell you how this works.
Okay.
So there was no marketplace. The matching was literally manual. And I would convince them to use the platform, which meant the time will be tracked through the software. You'll pay X dollars per hour. And we need you to make a deposit of $100 to get started. And if they decided to give it a go, we had somebody else that was sending out resumes, and he'd pick one, and they'd work together. That's how it started. It was as manual as you could imagine. Calling and emailing documents around. Eventually, we built the marketplace that you see there. But because, now that may seem a little weird, but actually, if you put an entrepreneur's hat on, it was a great way to start because we learned so much. I talked to hundreds of customers in like my first month,
right,
and learned what they needed. So when we were ready to build a product, I knew what the customer needed. And we hired a buddy of mine who did sales for a while and ran the sales team. And we had a finger on the pulse of what the customers needed. And we got to know them. So, I mean, I had a bunch of, one of my favorite stories was my buddy who we hired, who ran the sales team, one of his first customers hired an engineer to build a website for him. And the customer was really happy for like the first month and would once in a while go into Yahoo Messenger, which was what we used back in the day to message, and was saying, hey, this is great, checking in, really happy with it. And then all of a sudden one day he messages my buddy and says, dude, we got a big effing problem. I think this engineer you gave me went crazy because he has, like, the guy had admin access to my website. He locked me out of the site and he replaced the homepage of the site with Arabic stuff, and I'm not sure what it is, but I think it's terrorist propaganda.
Uh-oh.
Okay. So, I mean, that happened, right? Literally that happened, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like the biggest company in the world. The guy probably didn't have that many people go to his website. So, it's not like babies died in a tragic accident. Like, but for this customer, he could not have been more irate. Okay. Eventually, he managed to regain control of his website, delete the Arabic stuff on the homepage, whatever it was, and probably didn't use this again. Okay. But this was maybe one of the more extreme cases. But there were plenty of people that had a really bad experience because it's hard to hire someone good. It really is, and we did things in my time there to chip away at this problem. But quality is not something that you're never going to wake up and say, oh, now we have perfect people, right? There aren't perfect people. So one of the things, the first thing, an obvious thing we did is we put in place a feedback system, right? So at the end of every project, you give the 5-star rating, which helps, but there's many flaws with that system. If you're curious.
Yeah, there are, and there's like, even like every time you get in Uber, like they're asking about the 5 stars to make sure that you're going to give it to them, because it is catastrophic for them if they don't get the 5 stars.
Okay, so here's the fun fact, the little known fact.
Okay.
About this. This is secondhand, but I'm pretty sure it's true.
I love internet rumor mills.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Go ahead.
I believe that. So when you finish working with somebody on Upwork, at the end, you're asked to give the feedback, the 5 stars. But last I heard, you're actually asked to leave 2 scores, a public score and a private score, where the private score is just for Upwork, the platform, whereas the public score is going to go on this guy's resume. Mm-hmm. Can you guess how these scores were related?
No. I mean, I filled out a few, like, because I don't want to ding a guy who did good work, but he just wasn't interpersonally good. You know what I'm saying?
100%. And
that's why that exists, right?
Everyone's like you, okay? So it turns out that 20% of the people that got a 5 publicly got a 1 privately.
Really?
Yeah. So social pressure. It's kind of like when somebody says, hey, did you like that dinner I made you? Right? Like what are you saying, right? It's one of those things. Now, how did I do? And by the way, it's going to be on my resume forever. And while working together, I've told you how I have kids to feed and a life. And if you give me a 1, I'm on the street, right? So that's one of the quality issues, and that they've kind of tackled that way. There's other things we did. We put in place a testing program so that people could like take tests to validate they know a programming language or other skills, and all that's helpful.
Right.
But it's still, I like to say, it's still buyer beware. And so, I mean, the quick segue and connection to Rev was when me and the buddy of mine who worked with me at Upwork, when we were ready to do a company, we thought for remote work to really scale, we need to solve this quality issue. Mm-hmm. We need to offer services where we can guarantee quality. Where at Upwork, quality is really on the individual, not on the platform. You know, going in, you might hire someone that's not good. Whereas with Rev, we thought that there's many categories of work where we could guarantee the quality, promise it's going to be good, and that means the customer wouldn't have to even think about it. They could just throw stuff over the wall and get it back.
Right.
And there's a narrower set of categories for which that works, but we make so the ones I mentioned that we do at scale right now are around typing, like transcription and captions. We have others that we're developing. We think that it's not just for the entrepreneur. So one of the challenges for Upwork historically is that you are their sweet spot, 100%.
Oh yeah, but that's why. Yeah, I would wear a baseball hat of theirs if they made one for me.
They should. But if somebody kind of like you, but actually works at a big company in an IT department, not worth the risk. Not going to take a chance.
Yes. For
a lot of reasons. And for the kind of services that we do, we believe we can capture the whole market. So if you need to transcribe something or caption something, there is no better option. We're miles ahead of the competition.
Gotcha. So, and then, you know, Timmy has come in the last year as I'm looking at this closer. So that's the obviously the automated transcription. So the internet says that you have 1,400 employees in terms of how LinkedIn views it. So from your perspective, do you think of these remote workers as employees? Because obviously the corporate population is lower than that, right? Or am I off?
No. So you're asking the right questions. So the people that make money on the site aren't employees; they're independent contractors.
Right.
We informally use the term revers because they work on Rev. That's how we use it in our internal lingo. And we have about 100 employees, of which 80 of the 100 are either in our offices in Austin or San Francisco, and most of those 100 are doing software development to build the site. And as I mentioned, we have 20,000 that work from home, and they're freelancers.
How many?
20,000.
20,000. That's huge.
And some of them choose to add us to put us on LinkedIn, right? So some of those are showing up in that count that you're talking about.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes perfect sense. I mean, and they should too. Like that's your job.
Totally, 100%.
Throw it on there.
Yeah, and I mean, a little bit about that relationship. It's similar to Upwork in some ways, but very different. So the similarities are anybody can apply to join. If you only work on the stuff you want to work on. Mm-hmm. You get paid reliably. You can think of it as building a career and reputation in a way. Upwork and Rev both care about quality, and so if you ask me who are our best workers, I have an answer. I know who they are. If you ask Upwork who the best workers are, I bet they have an answer as well. Right. And internally, they have kind of a money ball, a lot of data, a lot of stats, a lot of baseball statistics on understanding how good people are at different aspects of the work. The key difference is that on our business model, the way we've defined things, the freelancer never has to sell themselves. They never have to apply to a job. They only accept the work if they want it. You mentioned earlier about the guy in Malaysia that calls you on the phone once a week, right? If you want to be successful on your average freelancing platform, you have to budget a lot of time to sell yourself. And if you're a stud who's super busy and really in demand, you might sell yourself for 5% of the time. And if you're brand new, you might sell yourself 90% of the time. Mm-hmm. But like a typical worker in the platform has to sell themselves a lot. which two problems with that. One, it's time you're not getting paid for. Two, a lot of people don't enjoy that. In fact, many people hate selling themselves and just won't do it.
Yeah.
So it only works for someone that's pretty entrepreneurial, doesn't mind selling themselves. Whereas if you're on Rev and a customer brings us a TV show to caption, you can do it or not, and there's no selling. Once you're qualified, you can accept the job or not. First come, first serve. So we like to think that, and the freelancers tell us that that's a pretty compelling value proposition. That the fact that I can work as much or as little as I want, I never have to sell myself, I never have to bid on a project, I never have to like do a bunch of work to get a job and then not get it.
Right.
Now, you're probably a pretty stand-up, ethical kind of customer, but I guarantee you there's many customers on Upwork that take advantage of people. How do you do that? You say, you go to an engineer, say, I'm thinking of building a website to do X, Y, and Z. How would you build it? Oh, can you draw me a schematic? Okay, great. Oh, that's pretty cool. How should that work? And then you don't hire them.
Yeah, that's pretty greasy, but I'm sure that happens all the time.
Totally.
Yeah. So in terms of Rev, I'd like to apply for a transcription job right now on the podcast. If you ever get the opportunity to transcribe the Office series, I'm good to go.
We might have. I don't even know.
Yeah, I'm obviously kidding. But you have, so Rev is killer. And you guys are private. You can't speak to revenues or anything, can you?
No, I can't. I mean, I can tell you what we have on our website, that we've served over 100,000 clients. So, I mean, 100,000 clients, 100 employees. So, we serve a lot of clients.
Okay. Well, I won't badger you on that then. So you have invested in 15 different companies. You have a background in VC. And they're all listed out here. Have you defined kind of a formula of the types of things you look at, or is it each one comes in and it's evaluated individually?
I have my own little formula, or I should say rules of thumb. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's two high-level things, and I'll talk about what I mean by that. One is I prefer marketplaces because marketplace, an internet site that connects two groups of people, ideally for a transaction. I've spent most of my professional career between Upwork and Rev building marketplaces, so it's something that I know a little bit about.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I'm looking for a business that I believe has winner-take-all characteristics. I'm looking for one where, now, if you spend time with investors and you hear the lingo, they talk about network effects, they talk about unfair advantages. I'm looking for a site that if it gets big, things get easier and easier and easier for it over time. And I'll just give you an example. Upwork. Okay, Upwork made their IPO filing confidentially a few weeks ago. It's not confidential that they made it. It was in the news, but the filing is still confidential. So they made their filing, which implies that they've hired a good banker to go public, which means that they're pretty big and have good numbers.
Yes.
Okay. If you and I decided today, hey, let's go create a company to compete with Upwork, we could do it, but you know what? Be an uphill battle. Okay.
Yeah, big time.
Big time, because everyone's on there. The customers are there. The workers are there. They have a lot of history, a lot of relationships, a lot of context. The software's pretty good. That if you and I could, if you and I took $100 million, and it's probably what it would take, and maybe $50 million, and replicated the site, replicated every feature, every last aspect, every feature that they had ever built, and we did it just as good as they had done. Well, let's say that was possible. And we had no users. How much is that worth?
Very little.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yeah. Totally nothing.
So it reminds me of, and I spent some time at Amazon, is the Amazon flywheel. I'm sure you've heard that.
Big time. Love it.
That for those that aren't familiar, the flywheel is essentially what Jason just described, which is getting traffic, essentially serving the users, getting them to talk about it, and it perpetuates itself and becomes larger and larger and larger. And that's what you're talking about. That's essentially the biggest winner-take-all market that's going on right now in the U.S. now.
Look, absolutely. I mean, I think every serious investor is talking about flywheels and network effects all day long. Amazon has published their flywheel, and I've met examples of people that they're encouraged to think about it and look for new flywheels. That's what we do too. So, when I look to invest, I look at what do I think, where is there a large market where there's a lot of people today spending money, where this platform could build a flywheel where if they get enough buyers and sellers together, things will get easier for them. So instead of being a rock pushing uphill, it'll start rolling downhill. And
then you get different problems, but those are great problems to have, right?
Totally. So that's the thesis, and it's worked out. My investments are mostly pretty early. I've made most of them the last couple of years, but I think there's quite a few of them where we're seeing that thesis work.
Awesome, man. Anything else you want to tell us about the experience? I mean, we didn't even get to Rev in that big of a way, but it's such a cool story. Is there anything that like you'd want to drop in for the knockout punch?
I would encourage. If there was one thing I would drop in for your for the bulk of your listeners, I would assume that your listeners are investing in themselves, trying to learn and grow, and also be productive. I would encourage them to give our service Timmy a try. TEMI.com.
Okay.
It is speech recognition, and it's cheap and affordable. The first thing you order is free. You can use the app. You could be in the car going to work, and you can dictate. Let's say you have to write a memo. Let's say you have to plan for a meeting. You can make notes to self, and you're going to get a very accurate transcript from that. That's better than what you're going to get from Apple or Google. So you can be productive in the car. You can write a book or write a blog post when you're going for a walk at the beach or by the river. And
that's so cool because we just had an episode about writing a book, and people say they don't have time. I didn't know Timmy did that. So
we have a lot of people
awesome.
using Timmy to write books or write blog posts.
That is so cool.
I would say give it a try. First file is free. Beyond that, it's like 10 cents a minute. So an order might be like $1.
Awesome. That is really cool. I didn't think of that application. I'm sure there's tons of other things. Are there any other fringe benefits that maybe people aren't thinking of when they hear transcription by voice?
So big for podcasters, big for taking notes. So next meeting, instead of taking notes at your meeting, use Timmy. There's an iPhone and Android app. Use Timmy to record the meeting, and then you have a transcript you can share with people that were in the meeting. So podcasts, notes, dictate or write a book on the go.
So this is 10 cents a minute.
Yes.
And just so you guys don't get in trouble, salespeople out there, if you use this, make sure you ask people in the meeting that they can get recorded.
Absolutely.
We're trying to follow the rules here. So Jason, I appreciate you coming on, man. It's you're local in Austin, so we got to get you in the office and expound on this because this is great content. If I had been hearing this stuff on a regular basis when I was 18, 19, trajectories would have changed. And so we put this out here specifically for that, for that effort. So I appreciate you doing it and being so willing to come out and bestow some knowledge on the crew here.
Thanks so much, Lee. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Appreciate it.